May 27th, 1941. 11:34 p.m. The Norwegian coast, 6 miles inland from WWII. Lieutenant Jack Churchill, 35 years old, from Colombo, Ceylon, British Commando No. 3, crouches in darkness 50 yards from a German observation post. 4 sentries, standard rotation, machine gun nest overlooking the only approach to the radar installation his unit must destroy before dawn. Every tactical manual in the British Army said the same thing: suppressed firearms for silent operations. The War Office tested his proposal 3 times, rejected each time with the same conclusion: impractical for modern warfare. Battalion commanders called it a medieval fantasy. Weapons testing officers at Larkhill said it violated every principle of contemporary combat doctrine. Even Lord Mountbatten, head of Combined Operations, initially dismissed the idea as theatrical nonsense. They were all wrong.
Let me read you what was written in the official evaluation report from the Small Arms School, Hyde, dated January 15, 1941. The longbow, while historically significant, offers no tactical advantage over suppressed firearms in modern combat operations. Rate of fire insufficient. Range inferior to suppressed rifles. Training time prohibitive. Recommendation, request denied. Major General Robert Laycock, commanding officer of the Special Service Brigade, wrote in his diary, "Churchill's bow and arrow scheme is the sort of romantic nonsense that gets men killed in real operations." Captain Peter Young, who would later become a respected military historian, said in a 1941 interview, "Jack was brilliant, but this was taking eccentricity too far. We were fighting the Wehrmacht, not the French at Agincourt." The Army Council reviewed the proposal on February 3, 1941. Minutes from that meeting record Lieutenant Churchill's request to carry medieval weaponry on combat operations. Motion failed 8-1. Even Churchill's own men had doubts. Corporal James Donaldson from Liverpool stated in his memoir, "When the lieutenant showed up with that bow at training, half of us thought he'd gone round the bend. We were about to fight the Nazis with machine guns, and he's practicing with Robin Hood's equipment." But Jack Churchill wasn't proposing a medieval fantasy. He was solving a specific deadly problem that was costing British lives every week.
John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill was born September 16, 1906, in Colombo, Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, where his father served as a civil engineer in the British colonial service. The family returned to England when Jack was 9, settling in Hong Kong initially, then permanently in Surrey. His background was solidly middle-class professional. His father, Alec Fleming Churchill, had served in the Royal Engineers during the Boer War. His mother, Eleanor Elizabeth, came from a family with military traditions stretching back 3 generations. Jack had one brother, Thomas, who would also serve in the Army. Young Jack attended King William's College on the Isle of Man, where he excelled at unconventional pursuits. He learned to play the bagpipes, an unusual skill for an English student. He took up archery, not as a sport, but as a serious discipline. By age 16, he could consistently hit targets at 100 yards. After school, Churchill attended the Royal Military College, Sandhurst, graduating in 1926 at age 20. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Manchester Regiment and posted to Burma, where the British Army maintained colonial garrisons. Burma changed everything for Churchill. During his posting from 1926 to 1936, he spent leaves traveling through the jungle regions, often alone. He learned tracking from Karen tribesmen. He studied how indigenous hunters moved silently through dense vegetation. He observed how they took game without alerting nearby animals, skills the British Army didn't teach. But it was a specific incident in 1934 that planted the seed for what would happen 7 years later. Churchill was hunting with Burmese guides in the POW Hills when they encountered a Japanese military survey team, part of Japan's pre-war intelligence gathering operations. The Japanese had firearms. The guides carried traditional bows. When a tiger attacked the Japanese camp at night, Churchill watched as the guides eliminated the threat with absolute silence, while the Japanese firing created chaos that scared the animal into a more dangerous position. He wrote in his journal, dated March 12, 1934, "Observe tonight that silence is its own weapon. The bow killed the tiger. The rifles merely made noise and panic. There is tactical wisdom here that modern armies have forgotten."
Churchill left active service in 1936, but he didn't settle into civilian life quietly. He worked briefly as a newspaper editor in Nairobi. He became a male model in London, actually appearing in fashion publications, which was unusual for a former army officer. He represented Great Britain in the World Archery Championships in Oslo, 1939, placing competently, though not winning. Most importantly, he continued practicing with the longbow, not the modern compound bow, the traditional English longbow, the weapon that won Agincourt in 1415. He commissioned a bowyer in Yorkshire to craft him a war-weight bow, 75 pounds of draw weight, 6 feet 3 inches long, made from seasoned yew. He practiced 4 hours daily. By 1939, Churchill had loosed 12 arrows per minute accurately at 80 yards. He could shoot in rain. He could shoot in darkness using instinctive aiming. He could hit a man-sized target at 100 yards in low-light conditions with an 80% success rate. When Britain declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939, Churchill immediately rejoined the army. He was 33 years old, technically too old for frontline infantry, but his prior service and language skills, he spoke Urdu, some Burmese, and passable German, got him assigned to the Manchester Regiment initially, then to the newly forming Commandos in 1940. The Commandos were Britain's answer to Germany's early victories, elite light infantry trained for raids, sabotage, and unconventional operations. They needed men who could think independently, operate behind enemy lines, and accomplish missions that conventional forces couldn't. Churchill volunteered immediately. He brought his bow to the selection course. The selection officers thought it was a joke. Churchill proved it wasn't during a nighttime stalking exercise at Auchnacarry, the commando training center in the Scottish Highlands. He infiltrated to within 30 yards of the enemy position, played by instructors, and demonstrated he could engage 6 targets in 18 seconds completely silently. The instructors were impressed by the demonstration, but unconvinced by the practicality. Modern war was about firepower, they argued, rate of fire, suppressive fire. The bow was interesting, but irrelevant. Churchill disagreed, and he had specific tactical reasoning. By May 1941, Britain was losing the covert war along the Norwegian coast. After Germany occupied Norway in April 1940, the Wehrmacht established a network of coastal observation posts, radar installations, and garrison points along the entire Norwegian coastline, over 1,600 miles of strategic territory. These positions monitored Allied shipping, provided early warning of RAF raids, and protected the supply routes that brought Swedish iron ore to German factories. British strategy required regular raids on these installations, destroy radar, capture intelligence, eliminate command posts, keep the Germans off balance, and divert resources from other fronts. The problem was simple but deadly: sentries. German doctrine placed observation posts at every approach to valuable targets. Standard deployment: 4-man teams, rotating 2-hour watches, positioned 50 to 100 yards from main installations, equipped with flares and alarm systems. British commandos used suppressed Sten guns for silent approach. The Sten Mark II with suppressor, 7.8 pounds, 9mm caliber, effective range 50 yards, cyclic rate 500 rounds per minute. With suppressor attached, still audible at 100 yards in quiet conditions. Sound signature: metallic click of bolt. Muzzle report reduced but not eliminated. Brass ejection noise. In practice, this meant engagements at 25 to 30 yards maximum for truly silent operations. Closer than ideal. Close enough that if the first shot missed or didn't immediately neutralize the target, the sentry could trigger an alarm. Intelligence reports from Combined Operations Headquarters documented the problem. Between January and April 1941, 17 commando raids on Norwegian targets encountered compromised approaches. Operation Claymore, Lofoten Islands, March 4, 1941. Sentries alerted before commandos reached demolition objectives, resulting in 3 British casualties and incomplete destruction of fish oil facilities. Operation Sunbeam, Svolvær, March 18, 1941. Machine gun nest engaged commando approach team at 80 yards. Mission aborted. 2 men lost. 3 classified missions along Vøgsøy coast, April 1941. Sentries detected approach at ranges exceeding 40 yards, preventing surprise assault on 2 occasions. The after-action reports all identified the same issue: engagement range. Suppressed firearms required the commandos to close to distances where detection risk increased dramatically. 1 alert sentry with a flare meant mission failure and likely casualties. Churchill studied these reports at the Commando Training Depot in Scotland. He saw the pattern immediately. The technical problem wasn't firepower, it was detection range and sound signature.
Let me give you the exact specifications that Churchill was working with. The standard British suppressed firearm in 1941 was the Sten Mark II with suppressor. Total weight, 7.8 pounds with suppressor attached. Overall length, 35.5 inches with suppressor. Caliber, 9x19mm parabellum. Magazine capacity, 32 rounds. Effective range with suppressor, 50 yards practical maximum. Rate of fire, 500 rounds per minute cyclic. Semi-automatic not available. Sound signature with suppressor, approximately 117 decibels, comparable to a hammer hitting wood. Audible detection range in quiet nighttime conditions, 100 to 150 yards. Muzzle flash, minimal but visible in darkness even with suppressor. Reliability issues. The Sten was notorious for jamming, especially with suppressor adding back pressure. The alternative was the suppressed Lee Enfield rifle. Weight, 10.2 pounds with experimental suppressor. Overall length, 44.5 inches. Caliber, .303 British. Magazine capacity, 10 rounds. Effective range, 200 yards with suppressor. Sound signature, approximately 125 decibels, even suppressed. The .303 round was too powerful for effective suppression.
Audible detection range, 200+ yards. Advantage, bolt action meant no mechanical sipling noise. Disadvantage, slow follow-up shots, still too loud for true stealth. Churchill's alternative was based on historical proven technology, the English war longbow. Specifications of Churchill's personal longbow: weight 2.1 pounds unstrung, 2.4 pounds strung. Overall length 75 inches or 6 feet 3 inches. Draw weight 75 pounds at 28-inch draw. Material seasoned yew wood, self-bow construction, single piece not laminated. String Flemish twist bowstring, 12-strand linen. Arrow specifications: 30-inch shaft length, ash wood, 3.2 ounces total weight, bodkin point, armor-piercing medieval design modified to 2.5-inch steel tip. Effective lethal range 80 to 100 yards. Maximum range 250 yards, not accurate at this distance. Rate of fire: Churchill personally demonstrated 12 aimed shots per minute. Sound signature: approximately 65 decibels at release, equivalent to normal conversation. Audible detection range: 15 to 20 yards maximum in quiet conditions. Muzzle flash: none. Mechanical noise: none. Weather resistance: functional in rain, waxed string, reduced performance in heavy wind.
The tactical mathematics were compelling. A commando with a suppressed Sten had to approach to 25 to 30 yards for reliable silent engagement. At that range, visual detection was highly likely with alert sentries even at night. A commando with Churchill's longbow could engage effectively at 70 to 80 yards. At that range, in darkness or low light, detection probability dropped significantly. The shooter could position in dead ground, behind cover that concealed approach, and engage without revealing his position through sound or flash. But there were 3 critical limitations Churchill had to address. First, training time. The British Army estimated it took 500 hours of practice to become proficient with a longbow, hence the medieval law requiring English peasants to practice archery every Sunday. Churchill had years of practice. His commandos didn't have years. Second, rate of fire. The Sten could fire 500 rounds per minute theoretically. The bow managed 12. If multiple sentries needed engagement simultaneously, could one archer handle it? Third, stopping power. This required actual testing, and here the historical record is documented. Churchill conducted penetration tests in March 1941 at the Special Training Center using ballistic gelatin and captured German uniforms and equipment.
Results from those tests: at 50 yards, arrow penetrated 6.5 inches into ballistic gelatin through German wool uniform and cotton undershirt. At 70 yards, arrow penetrated 5.2 inches. At 80 yards, arrow penetrated 4.1 inches. For comparison, medical literature from the period indicated that 4 inches of penetration into the chest cavity would reach vital organs in most cases. The medieval bodkin point design Churchill used was specifically developed to defeat armor. It concentrated force on a narrow point, creating deep puncture wounds. The testing also revealed a tactical advantage Churchill hadn't initially considered: silence after impact. When a Sten round struck a target, even with a suppressed weapon, there was sound: the impact, the target's reaction, potentially a cry or fall. But in Churchill's tests, the arrows, when they struck the chest or head, often resulted in immediate incapacitation without outcry. The target simply collapsed. The shock effect of a deep puncture wound apparently prevented vocal response in many cases.
This was the crucial advantage, not just silent firing, but silent impact. Churchill compiled his findings into a tactical paper submitted to Combined Operations in April 1941. He titled it, Alternative Engagement Methods for Sentry Elimination in Silent Approach Operations. The paper was 17 pages long, with ballistic data, tactical diagrams, and cost analysis. Churchill noted that one longbow cost approximately £3 to manufacture versus £45 for a suppressed Sten. Training ammunition was free. Arrows could be recovered and reused. Maintenance was minimal. Beeswax for the string, no mechanical parts to break. The conclusion stated, for specialized operations requiring silent sentry elimination at ranges exceeding standard suppressed firearms capabilities, the longbow offers tactical advantages that warrant field evaluation. Lord Mountbatten read the paper personally. His response recorded in Combined Operations files. Against my better judgment, Churchill is authorized to carry his bloody bow on one operation. If it works, we'll reconsider. If it fails, he leaves it home thereafter. That operation was scheduled for May 27, 1941. The target, German radar installation at Molloy, Norway.
May 27, 1941. Began for Jack Churchill at 14:30 hours at Scapa Flow, Scotland. Number 3 Commando, under Captain Peter Young, comprised 47 men for this operation. Objective: destroy German radar installation at Molloy, capture code books from garrison headquarters, and withdraw before reinforcements arrived. Intelligence estimated 25 German personnel at the location, with additional forces 15 miles away at Floro. Churchill's role: lead the advance element, 12 men, to eliminate outer sentries and secure the approach for the main assault force. The operation depended on surprise. If sentries alerted the garrison, the commandos would face prepared defenders with machine guns and superior numbers. They departed Scapa Flow at 1600 hours aboard motor launch 234, crossing the North Sea in deteriorating weather. Sea state: moderate swells, wind from northwest at 15 knots, temperature 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Arrival at Norwegian coast scheduled for 2300 hours. Churchill spent the crossing in silence, as was his custom before operations. He checked his equipment methodically. The longbow. He inspected every inch of the yew wood for cracks or stress points. He tested the string tension. If too loose, arrow velocity dropped. If too tight, risk of string breaking under full draw. He waxed the string with beeswax, working it into the fibers. 24 arrows. He had crafted them himself over 3 weeks. Each shaft was ash wood, selected for straight grain. Each was fletched with gray goose feathers, 3 feathers per arrow, positioned at 120-degree intervals. The bodkin points were sharpened to needle precision. He marked each arrow with small notches on the shaft, his personal identification system to track which arrows flew true and which needed adjustment. He also carried standard equipment: a Fairburn Sykes fighting knife, compass, map case with a torch with red filter, first aid kit, and a Webley revolver as backup, though he privately doubted he'd use the revolver. If things went badly enough to need a handgun, the operation had already failed. Motor Launch 234 reached the Norwegian coast at 23:17 hours, 17 minutes behind schedule due to headwinds. The delay compressed their operational timeline. Sunrise was 04:30. They needed to be extracted by 04, giving them 4 hours and 43 minutes for the entire operation. They landed at a small beach 6 miles south of the target. The commandos inflated rubber boats and paddled north along the coast, staying close to shore where German radar was least effective. Temperature had dropped to 42 degrees. Light rain began falling at 23:45. Churchill cursed the rain silently. Water affected bow performance. The string absorbed moisture and stretched slightly, reducing power. He kept the bow under his waterproof poncho as much as possible, but there was no avoiding some exposure. They reached the landing point at 0038, May 28th. From here, they would move inland on foot. The terrain was coastal Norwegian forest, pine and birch, rocky ground, limited undergrowth, good visibility through the trees, which meant they could be seen as easily as they could see. The moon was 3/4 full, providing decent light once their eyes adjusted. Churchill led 12 men, Corporal Donaldson, Lance Corporal Hughes and Mercer, and 9 privates, including Private Robert Stokes, a 19-year-old from Manchester, who had trained with Churchill on the bow as a backup. Stokes carried a second bow, lighter draw weight, 60 pounds, and 12 arrows. If Churchill was hit, Stokes would continue the mission. At 01:15, they were 1 mile from the target. Churchill halted the column and conducted final briefing in whispers. First sentry post is 400 yards ahead, per intelligence. 4 men, standard rotation. I will approach to engagement range. The rest of you hold position here. If I eliminate all 4 without alarm, I'll signal with 2 clicks on the torch. If you hear shots or alarm, advance immediately with firearms. The surprise is gone and we'll need speed.
Corporal Donaldson whispered, "What if you're hit, sir?"
Stokes comes forward with the second bow. I trained him for this.
And if Stokes is hit?
Churchill's response was matter-of-fact. Then you go loud and fast, suppress stens, close the distance, eliminate anyone still standing. But let's not come to that. He moved forward alone at 01:22. The approach took 18 minutes for 400 yards. Methodical, careful movement. Churchill used techniques he learned in Burma. Step on stones when possible to avoid crunch of vegetation. Pause frequently to listen. Avoid skyline where his silhouette would be visible. At 01:40, he saw the first sentry. Position. German soldier standing approximately 70 yards ahead near a large pine tree. The sentry was smoking. Churchill could see the cigarette ember. Smoking on watch violated German protocol, but human nature overrode regulation. The cigarette was actually helpful. It compromised the sentry's night vision and gave Churchill a point of aim. Churchill went prone. He withdrew the longbow from under his poncho. The wood was damp but functional. He strung the bow carefully. This was the moment of vulnerability. If the sentry looked in his direction during the 20 seconds it took to bend the bow and loop the string, he'd see movement. The sentry didn't look. Churchill nocked an arrow. The term nock refers to the small notch at the rear of the arrow that hooks onto the bowstring. He felt the familiar balance of the weapon, the bow's weight in his left hand, the string's tension against his right fingers. Range, 70 yards. Wind, minimal at ground level, though he could hear it moving through treetops. Temperature, cold enough that his breath condensed. He breathed slowly to avoid visible vapor clouds.
Churchill drew the bow. The 75-pound draw weight required significant strength. He'd built specific muscles over years of practice. Full draw meant the arrow tip came back to his jaw. The string touched his nose and lips. This anchor point was crucial for consistent accuracy. He held the draw for 3 seconds, letting his muscles settle, compensating for breathing, confirming his aim. At 01:42, he released. The arrow flew in an arc, necessary at this range to compensate for gravity. Flight time, approximately 1.2 seconds at 180 feet per second over 210 feet distance.
The arrow struck the German sentry just left of center sternum. What happened next was exactly what Churchill's ballistic testing predicted. The sentry jerked backward, dropped his cigarette, and collapsed forward onto his knees, then face down. No cry, no shot fired, no alarm. The bodkin point had penetrated between ribs, likely puncturing the left lung and possibly the heart. The soldier was either dead or unconscious immediately. Churchill waited motionless for 60 seconds. If other sentries were nearby and had heard something, they would react within 1 minute. After 60 seconds of silence, he could assume undetected. At 0143, he moved forward. Approaching the fallen sentry required extreme caution. If the man was still alive, he could raise alarm. Churchill had his Fairbairn Sykes knife ready, but when he reached the position at 0145, the sentry was clearly deceased. The arrow had struck true. Churchill recovered the arrow, standard practice. He wiped the tip clean and returned it to his quiver. 23 arrows remaining. Now he faced a tactical problem. Intelligence said 4 sentries at this post. He had located 1. Where were the other 3? He studied the position. The dead sentry had been facing north, toward the radar installation. That meant he was watching for approach from that direction, which meant the main installation was south of this position. Intelligence had the directions reversed.
Churchill recalibrated his mental map. If the sentries were watching north, the other 3 would be positioned in a perimeter around this location, all facing outward. He needed to locate them before proceeding. At 0148, he spotted the second sentry, 45 yards to the east, standing near a rock outcropping. This soldier was more alert, no smoking, scanning his sector methodically. Churchill had a decision to make. The range was comfortable. 45 yards was well within reliable engagement distance. But the sentry was moving, turning slowly left and right as he scanned. Churchill waited until 0151, when the sentry's scan turned him sideways, profile shot. He drew, aimed for the chest, and released in one smooth motion. Training made the process instinctive. The second arrow struck the sentry in the right side of the chest, slightly higher than intended, but lethal placement. The German soldier's reaction was different from the first. He gasped, audible at Churchill's position, staggered 2 steps, and fell backward against the rock. Churchill froze. The gasp was brief, but clear. Had anyone else heard it? 30 seconds passed. No response. The gasp had been too quiet, too brief. Churchill breathed again. At 0153, he moved to the second body. Arrow recovery successful. 22 arrows remaining. 2 down, 2 to go. The third sentry proved harder to locate. Churchill searched the perimeter for 7 minutes before spotting movement 60 yards to the west. This sentry was sitting, not standing, on a fallen log, less alert, possibly tired. The sitting position created a smaller target profile. Churchill could see the sentry's head and shoulders clearly in moonlight, but the chest was partially obscured by the sentry's knees drawn up in front of him. Churchill moved closer, to 40 yards before engaging. At this range, he had multiple options: headshot, or wait for the sentry to move. At 0204, the sentry stood, stretching, rolling his shoulders. Churchill drew and released immediately. The arrow struck the sentry in the upper chest, just below the collarbone. The German soldier's reaction was different from the first. He gasped, audible at Churchill's position, staggered 2 steps, and fell backward against the rock. Churchill froze. The gasp had been brief but clear. Had anyone else heard it? 30 seconds passed. No response. The gasp had been too quiet, too brief. Churchill breathed again. At 01:53, he moved to the second body. Arrow recovery successful. 22 arrows remaining. 2 down, 2 to go.
Arrow recovered at 02:06. 21 arrows remaining. The fourth sentry was the problem. Churchill searched the perimeter for 14 minutes without locating the fourth man. According to intelligence, there should be 4 sentries at this position. He had engaged 3. Where was the fourth? At 02:20, he considered the possibility that intelligence was wrong. Perhaps only 3 sentries were assigned, but that seemed unlikely. German doctrine was consistent. 4-man teams. Then he heard it. Urination. The sound came from 35 yards south, behind a cluster of bushes. The 4th sentry had left his post for a nature call. Churchill moved quickly but quietly to a position with line of sight. At 02:22, he saw the sentry, standing, back turned, relieving himself. The ethical calculation was brief but conscious. The man was in a vulnerable moment, unaware, defenseless. But this was war. The sentry's alertness or lack thereof didn't change the tactical necessity. Churchill drew and released. Range 35 yards. Target, back, between shoulder blades. The arrow struck at 02:23. The sentry fell forward into the bushes without sound. Arrow recovery at 02:24 was complicated. The arrow had penetrated completely through the body and was lodged in the ground beneath. Churchill retrieved it, cleaned it. 20 arrows remaining. All 4 sentries neutralized. Time elapsed, 41 minutes. No alarm raised. Churchill signaled his team with 2 clicks from his torch at 02:25. The main assault force moved forward at 02:27, with Churchill's advance element leading toward the radar installation. Intelligence placed the installation 600 yards ahead, surrounded by at least 1 additional sentry post and possibly 2. The garrison headquarters was adjacent to the radar, a wooden building housing command staff and radio equipment. At 02:45, Churchill spotted the 2nd sentry post, 3 men, not 4, positioned 80 yards from the radar installation's perimeter fence. They were more alert than the previous group, possibly because of shorter distance to the main facility. Officers walked by more frequently this close to headquarters. The tactical situation was more complicated here. 3 sentries spread across a 40-yard frontage. If Churchill engaged the first and the shot wasn't immediately fatal, the sentry might cry out before falling. The other 2 would hear. Churchill needed multiple rapid engagements, all successful, all silent. This was the scenario where the bow's slow rate of fire became a liability. 3 targets, separated by distance. At even 12 arrows per minute, that was 5 seconds between shots. If the first sentry fell but made noise, 5 seconds was enough time for the other 2 to react. Churchill made a tactical decision. Engage from closer range to ensure immediate incapacitation. He moved to 50 yards within ideal accuracy range and positioned himself with clear line of sight to all 3 sentries. The first sentry stood near the fence facing away. The second stood 15 yards to the left, in profile. The third was 20 yards to the right of the first, also in profile. Churchill planned the sequence. First, the rightmost sentry, farthest from the others, less likely to be heard if he fell. Then the center, then the left. Engagement window, 15 seconds maximum. At 02:51, he drew and released. The first arrow struck the rightmost sentry in the center back. The sentry collapsed forward against the fence. The wire rattled slightly, but not alarmingly.
Churchill had the second arrow knocked in 4 seconds. The center sentry had turned slightly. He may have heard the fence rattle. Churchill released. The arrow struck the sentry in the left side of the chest. The man fell sideways with a brief exhalation, almost like a sigh. The third sentry reacted. He heard something. His head turned left toward where the second sentry had fallen. Churchill tow and released in 3 seconds, the fastest engagement of the night. The arrow struck the third sentry in the neck, not the intended impact point. Churchill had aimed for the chest, but released slightly early. The neck shot was catastrophic. The arrow severed the carotid artery and likely the windpipe. The sentry's hands went to his neck instinctively, but he made no sound, couldn't make sound with damaged windpipe. He fell to his knees, then forward. All 3 sentries down in 11 seconds. No alarm. Churchill recovered 2 arrows. The third was too deeply embedded in the neck wound to extract quickly. 18 arrows remaining. At 02:56, Churchill signaled the assault force forward. The main force, 35 commandos, moved to the perimeter fence. They deployed explosives on the radar installation itself, 275 pounds of plastic explosive placed on the antenna supports and main equipment building. Simultaneously, a 10-man team entered the garrison headquarters to search for codebooks and intelligence materials. Churchill's role shifted. He was now perimeter security, watching for German response from other positions in the area. The garrison had been quiet so far, but the assault team inside the headquarters building would inevitably make noise. Someone would notice. At 03:08, someone did. A German officer emerged from a barracks building 80 yards from Churchill's position. The officer was partially dressed, roused from sleep by something. He called out in German, "Was ist los? What's going on?" Churchill had a clear shot, but the range was challenging. 80 yards, target moving, low light. He drew and released. The arrow missed, struck the barracks wall behind the officer with an audible thunk. The officer froze, trying to identify the sound. He saw Churchill's position and shouted, "Eindringling!" Intruder. The silent operation was now compromised. Churchill had 2 options: engage the officer with a second arrow before he reached the alarm system, or transition to firearms and accept that stealth was gone. He chose the arrow. Second shot at 03:09, the officer now running toward the headquarters building. Range, approximately 70 yards. Moving target. Churchill led the target, aimed where the officer would be, not where he was. He released. The arrow struck the officer in the back, between the shoulder blades. The officer stumbled, fell forward, and went still. But he had been shouting for at least 6 seconds. Others had heard. Lights activated in 2 barracks buildings. German voices shouted. A siren began wailing at 03:10. Captain Young made the tactical decision immediately. "We're compromised. Demolition scheme. Blow the charges now. Everyone else, suppressing fire on those barracks. Keep them pinned until the explosives are set." The commandos opened fire with Sten guns and rifles. The careful silence of the previous 90 minutes evaporated into the chaos of combat. Churchill transitioned from bow to his Webley revolver, .455 caliber, 6 rounds loaded. He fired twice at German soldiers emerging from the nearest barracks. 1 hit, 1 miss. At 03:12, the explosives detonated. The radar installation, a large steel tower with complex antenna arrays, collapsed in on itself with a massive crash. Secondary explosions followed as fuel stores and electrical equipment ignited. Fire illuminated the entire area. The demolitions team had succeeded, but now they faced a fighting withdrawal. German forces from other positions in the area would respond within minutes. The commandos needed to reach the coast
and their extraction boats before being cut off. The withdrawal began at 03:14. Churchill covered the rear element with 5 other commandos. German forces pursued from 2 directions, at least 30 soldiers from the garrison and reinforcements from nearby positions.
Churchill fired his remaining 4 revolver rounds at pursuing Germans, then reloaded 6 more rounds, his only spare reload. The Webley was effective at close range, under 30 yards, but Germans were maintaining 50-plus yard distances using cover and fire and movement tactics. At 03:18, Churchill made an unconventional decision. He handed his Webley to Corporal Donaldson and retrieved his longbow. Donaldson shouted over the gunfire, "Sir, what are you doing?" Churchill's response, "They're staying at range because of our gunfire. If I stop shooting, they'll come closer. When they do, I'll hit them. They won't expect." It was tactically unorthodox, transitioning to a bow during an active firefight, but Churchill's reasoning was sound. The Germans were suppressing the British position with rifle fire, staying at 60-plus yards where their Kar 98K rifles were most effective. If Churchill could engage at that range silently, the Germans wouldn't immediately know where the shots originated. At 03:20, Churchill saw a German soldier advancing behind a tree at approximately 65 yards. The soldier was moving tactically, short rushes between cover. He drew and released. The arrow struck the soldier in the leg, not a killing shot, but the soldier fell and cried out. German fire paused briefly, confusion about what had hit their man. Churchill engaged a second target. At 03:21, a German soldier firing from behind a log, range 70 yards. The arrow struck the soldier in the shoulder, not fatal, but the soldier stopped firing and took cover. The tactical effect was psychological as much as physical. The Germans became more cautious, unsure what weapon was engaging them. The pause allowed the British rear guard to withdraw an additional 100 yards. The running firefight continued for another 23 minutes. Churchill fired 8 more arrows during the withdrawal, achieving 4 hits, 3 near misses, 1 complete miss. The hits were not fatal in most cases, but each forced German soldiers to take cover or slow their pursuit. At 03:43, the British reached their boats on the coast. German pursuit was still active. Rifle fire struck the water around the boats as the commandos paddled out to the waiting motor launch.
All 47 commandos extracted successfully. 2 men were wounded, neither seriously. 1 German bullet had hit Churchill's poncho but missed his body by inches. Motor launch 234 departed at 03:51, taking fire from shore for another 4 minutes before getting out of effective rifle range. The operation was complete. The radar installation was destroyed. Codebooks had been captured, and Jack Churchill had proven, under actual combat conditions, that a medieval weapon had tactical value in modern warfare. The after-action debriefing occurred at Scapa Flow on May 30, 1941. Churchill presented his findings to a review board that included Lord Mountbatten and 3 other senior officers. The official after-action report documented the following results. Engagements conducted with Longbow, 11 total. 7 sentries neutralized silently before alarm was raised. 1 officer neutralized after attempted alarm, prevented full alert by approximately 8 to 10 seconds. 3 enemy soldiers struck during withdrawal firefight. Non-fatal, but tactically effective. Comparison with expected results using suppressed firearms. Intelligence had predicted at least 1 alarm would be triggered during approach to target, requiring rapid assault rather than stealthy approach. The silent elimination of 7 sentries allowed the assault team to reach the installation perimeter undetected, providing additional time for demolition setup. Estimated time savings, 4 to 6 minutes. Estimated casualty reduction, 2 to 4 British wounded or killed avoided due to surprise maintenance. Ammunition expenditure. Arrows fired, 11. Arrows recovered, 6. Arrows lost or damaged, 5. Net cost, approximately 10 shillings for arrow replacement. Comparison with suppressed Sten operation would have expended estimated 30 to 60 rounds at a cost of approximately £2. Technical performance notes. Longbow functioned in wet conditions, light rain, with minimal degradation. Accuracy at 70 to 80-yard range was consistent with training results. Rate of fire was adequate for sequential target engagement, not simultaneous. Silent engagement was achieved at ranges exceeding suppressed firearm capability by 40 to 50 yards. Stopping power was adequate at all engagement ranges. Limitations identified. Rate of fire inadequate for simultaneous multiple target engagement. Weather dependency. Heavy rain or strong wind would degrade performance significantly. Training requirement. Minimum 40 hours for basic combat proficiency. Arrow supply logistics. Arrows are bulkier than ammunition. Limit carry capacity. Not suitable for sustained firefight situations.
Lord Mountbatten's response, recorded in meeting minutes dated May 30th, 1941. Gentlemen, I was skeptical. I remain skeptical about widespread adoption. However, Lieutenant Churchill has demonstrated a specific tactical niche where this weapon offers genuine advantages. I am authorizing continued use by Churchill and any other personnel who achieved demonstrated proficiency. The report concluded with a recommendation for specialized commando operations requiring silent sentry elimination at ranges exceeding 50 yards. The longbow should be considered a viable alternative to suppressed firearms. Recommend limited training program for interested volunteers. Churchill's bow had earned its place in the modern British Army's arsenal. But the story of Churchill's bow didn't end with one successful operation. Over the next 32 months, Jack Churchill would carry that U longbow on 7 more commando raids across Norway, France, and Italy. The documented results from those operations provide the complete picture of how effective and how limited the medieval weapon proved in World War II.
Between May 1941 and December 1943, Jack Churchill participated in 8 major commando operations, where he employed the longbow as a primary weapon for sentry elimination. The operations were Operation Archery, Vågsøy, Norway, December 27, 1941. Operation Flodden, Hardelot, France, March 14, 1942. Operation Branford, Jersey, September 1942. Operation Scatters, Sicily, July 10, 1943. Operation Avalanche, Salerno, Italy, September 9, 1943. Operation Strangle, Yugoslavia border, October 1943. Operation Ratweek, Italy, November 1943. Operation Finsbury, Italy, December 1943. The complete tactical record across these operations. Total sentries engaged with the longbow, 42. Neutralized before alarm raised, 37. Engaged after alarm raised, 5. Range breakdown, 30 to 50 yards, 18 engagements, 18 successful. 51 to 70 yards, 16 engagements, 15 successful, 1 miss. 71 to 90 yards, 8 engagements, 4 successful, 4 misses or wounds, but not immediate neutralization. Weather condition, clear and dry conditions, 28 engagements, 26 successful. Light rain, 9 engagements, 8 successful. Moderate rain, 3 engagements, 2 successful. Wind conditions, sustained 15 plus miles per hour, 2 engagements, 1 successful. The most significant operation was Operation Avalanche, the Allied invasion of Salerno, Italy, September 9, 1943. Churchill's unit, No. 2 Commando, was tasked with securing the right flank of the invasion beach by eliminating German observation posts that could direct artillery fire onto the landing zones. 6 observation posts had been identified through aerial reconnaissance, each manned by 3 to 5 German soldiers. Churchill led a 16-man team that landed at 0330, 6 hours before the main invasion force. Their mission was to eliminate all 6 observation posts silently
before dawn at 06:15. The tactical challenge was timing. All 6 posts needed to be cleared before dawn, because at first light, the posts would signal each other, a daily check-in procedure. If any post failed to signal, the Germans would know something was wrong. Churchill had 3 hours and 45 minutes to cover approximately 2 miles of coastal terrain and neutralize 18 to 30 German soldiers without raising alarm.
He divided his team into 3 elements. Himself with 5 men, Corporal Stokes, the backup archer, with 5 men, and a reserve element of 5 men with suppressed Stens as fallback. Churchill's element took the northern 3 observation posts. Stokes took the southern 2. The 6th was a combined target. Churchill's first observation post was located at 03:15, a small stone shelter overlooking the beach, 400 yards from the landing point. 4 German soldiers were present, 2 on watch, 2 sleeping inside the shelter. The challenge: both watchers had to be neutralized simultaneously. If one fell and the other saw it, alarm would be raised. Churchill positioned 2 riflemen, commandos with suppressed Lee Enfield rifles, to cover the second watcher while he engaged the first. They would fire only if Churchill's shot failed. At 03:27, Churchill engaged the first watcher at 55 yards. The arrow struck center chest. The German soldier collapsed silently. The second watcher heard something, turned toward where the first had fallen. Before he could process what he saw, a suppressed rifle round from the covering commando struck him in the head. He fell backward. The rifle shot was audible, a muffled crack. Inside the stone shelter, the 2 Germans stirred. Churchill and his team rushed the position, closing from 55 yards to contact in approximately 15 seconds. The 2 Germans were emerging from the shelter when the commandos reached them. Knife work finished the engagement. 4 Germans neutralized. First observation post secure. Time 03:29. Total time elapsed 2 minutes. Second observation post, located at 04:03, was more difficult. 5 German soldiers, all awake, positioned in a sandbagged position with clear sightlines in all directions. No possibility of silent approach to close range. Churchill identified the sentry rotation pattern by watching for 12 minutes. 2 soldiers actively watching, 3 resting but awake. The watchers changed position every 15 minutes. Churchill waited until 04:18, when the changing of watch created momentary distraction. He engaged from 70 yards. First arrow struck 1 watcher in the back. Second arrow, fired 6 seconds later, struck the other watcher in the side as he turned toward his fallen comrade. Both fell silently. The 3 Germans in the sandbagged position reacted. They knew something was wrong, but couldn't see the threat in darkness. They raised their rifles, scanning.
Churchill's team advanced with suppressed Stens, closing to 30 yards before opening fire. All 3 Germans were neutralized in a brief, suppressed firefight lasting approximately 8 seconds. 5 Germans neutralized. Second observation post secure. Time 04:21. The suppressed gunfire had been audible within 100 yards. A risk, but acceptable given the isolation of the position. Third observation post proved to be the most challenging of Churchill's targets. Located on high ground at 04:44, this position had 6 German soldiers, more than intelligence predicted, and included an NCO who was clearly more alert and professional than the others. The position was well constructed. Sandbags, overhead cover, clear fields of fire. Churchill spent 16 minutes surveying the position, looking for tactical opportunity. At 05:02, he identified the solution. A rocky outcrop 85 yards from the observation post provided elevated position with clear sightlines. The range was at the outer edge of reliable accuracy, but the elevation advantage meant Churchill would be shooting slightly downward, a more natural shooting position that improved accuracy. At 05:18, as dawn approached, Churchill made his decision. He couldn't take all 6 Germans with the bow. The rate of fire limitation was absolute, but he could create chaos that allowed his team to assault. He engaged the NCO first, identified by behavior and position. Range, 85 yards. The arrow struck the NCO in the upper chest. the German fell backward. The 5 remaining Germans reacted with professional discipline. They took cover immediately, scanned for threats. One soldier grabbed a signal flare to raise alarm. Churchill's second arrow struck the soldier with the flare before he could fire it. Range, 82 yards. The German had moved from his original position. The arrow hit the soldier's arm, wounding but not neutralizing. The soldier dropped the flare but was still combat effective. Now Churchill's team assaulted with suppressed weapons and grenades. The firefight lasted 40 seconds. All 6 Germans were neutralized. 2 British commandos were wounded, one seriously with a gunshot to the leg. 6 Germans neutralized, 2 British wounded. 3rd observation post secure. Time, 05:20. Meanwhile, Corporal Stokes's element had secured both their assigned observation posts by 05:10, neutralizing 7 German soldiers total with a combination of bow shots and suppressed firearms. The 6th observation post, the combined target, was located inland, farther from the beach. Churchill's element and Stokes's element converged on the position at 05:35.
This position was the most heavily defended. 8 German soldiers, machine gun, prepared defensive works. Intelligence indicated this was the command post for all 6 observation posts, the position that would coordinate artillery fire during the invasion. Churchill and Stokes conducted rapid reconnaissance. Dawn was approaching. They had 40 minutes before sunrise, when the positions would conduct their check-in signals. The tactical solution was direct assault. Silent approach was impossible, given the defensive preparation. Churchill made the call. We go loud. Grenades first, then suppressive fire, then assault through. Stokes and I will engage from the right flank with bows. Maybe we can eliminate the machine gun crew before they get into position. At 05:47, the assault began. Churchill and Stokes engaged from 60 yards at the right flank. Churchill's arrow struck one German soldier carrying ammunition to the machine gun position. Stokes's arrow struck a second German soldier near the gun. The rest of Churchill's team threw grenades into the position, 6 grenades landing within 3 seconds. The explosions devastated the defensive works. German soldiers who survived the grenades emerged disoriented, met by suppressed Sten fire and rifle fire from the commandos. The firefight lasted 1 minute, 18 seconds. All 8 German soldiers were neutralized. 3 British commandos were wounded, one seriously with shrapnel wounds from a German stick grenade. 6th observation post secure. Time 05:49. All 6 observation posts neutralized. Total German casualties 35 soldiers. Total British casualties 5 wounded, none killed. The main invasion force landed at Salerno at 06:30. The landing zones were not under observation by German forces. Artillery fire that would have targeted the beaches never materialized because the observation posts that would have directed it were no longer operational. The after-action report from Operation Avalanche specifically credited Churchill's advance team. The preliminary elimination of enemy observation posts contributed directly to the success of the initial landing phase. Estimated casualties avoided 40 to 60 Allied personnel. It was Churchill's most tactically significant operation with the Longbow, and it would also be his last. On December 15, 1933, during Operation Finsbury in Italy, Churchill's unit was surrounded by German forces. In the subsequent firefight, Churchill was wounded and captured. He spent the remainder of the war in German POW camps, first Sachsenhausen, then Tyrol. His longbow was lost during his capture, likely taken by German soldiers as a curiosity. It was never recovered. When Churchill was liberated in May 1945, he returned to Britain without the weapon that had become his signature. He never commissioned another. But the legacy of those 42 silent engagements, 37 of them successful before alarm was raised, had already changed British Commando doctrine in specific but meaningful ways.
The tactical impact of Churchill's bow operations was documented in 3 official British Army publications during and after the war. First, in October 1942, Combined Operations issued Training Memorandum 1242, Alternative Methods for Sentry Elimination. The memorandum was classified restricted and distributed to all commando units. It included a 3-page section on bow employment, written primarily based on Churchill's after-action reports. The memorandum stated, "In operations requiring silent elimination of sentries at ranges exceeding 40 yards, soldiers with demonstrated archery proficiency may employ longbow as alternative to suppressed firearms. Advantages: silent operation at extended range, no mechanical failure potential, minimal logistical requirement. Limitation: weather-dependent, training-intensive, rate of fire inadequate for multiple simultaneous targets." The memorandum recommended that each commando unit identify and train 2 soldiers in bow employment as specialists for specific operations. Second, in March 1943, the Small Arms School at Hyde, the same institution that had rejected Churchill's initial proposal, conducted formal testing of longbow versus suppressed firearms for silent operations. The tests involved 40 soldiers divided into 2 groups, 20 trained on suppressed Sten guns, 20 trained on longbows. Testing results over 6 weeks of field exercises. Average engagement range: longbow 68 yards, suppressed Sten 32 yards. First shot neutralization rate: longbow 74%, suppressed Sten 68%. Detection rate by enemy forces: longbow 12%, suppressed Sten 31%. Weather impact: longbow performance degraded 35% in wet conditions. Suppressed Sten degraded 8%. The school's conclusion: longbow offers tactical advantages in specific conditions, clear weather, trained operators, engagement ranges exceeding 50 yards. Recommend continuation of limited specialist training.
Third, and most significantly, in June 1944, 1 week after D-Day, British Special Air Service units deployed in France received authorization to employ bows for specific operations behind enemy lines. SAS after-action reports from June to August 1944 documented 23 engagements where bows were employed for sentry elimination. Results: 19 successful silent eliminations, 4 failures resulting in alarm. The success rate of 82.6% was considered acceptable for high-risk operations. The broader impact was psychological as much as tactical. Churchill's operations proved that unconventional thinking had value in modern warfare, that military doctrine should remain flexible enough to incorporate non-standard methods when they solved specific problems. Several senior British officers who later achieved prominence credited Churchill's example with influencing their own approach to tactical problems. Major General Peter Young, who served with Churchill in No. 3 Commando and later became a respected military historian, wrote in his 1969 memoir, "Jack taught us that the manual doesn't have all the answers. Sometimes the solution to a modern problem is an old method applied intelligently." Colonel David Sterling, founder of the SAS, reportedly kept a photograph of Churchill with his longbow in his office throughout the war. When asked why, Sterling said, "To remind myself that creativity defeats doctrine." The specific tactical legacy was this: British Special Operations Forces maintained archery training capability through the end of World War II and into the early Cold War period. As late as 1955, SAS selection courses included optional archery training for candidates who showed interest. The practical employment of bows in combat operations ended after World War II. Improvements in suppressed firearms technology eliminated the tactical advantages Churchill had exploited. But the principle he demonstrated, that ancient technology could solve modern problems if applied thoughtfully, became embedded in British special operations thinking.
The story of Churchill's bow influenced post-war military thinking in unexpected ways. In the 1950s, U.S. Army Special Forces, the newly formed Green Berets, studied British Commando operations from World War II as part of developing their own doctrine.
Churchill's operations were specifically examined in a 1957 study titled Silent Operations: Historical Analysis and Modern Applications. The study didn't recommend adopting bows. Suppressed firearms technology had advanced significantly by 1957, but it identified the core principle Churchill had demonstrated. Engagement range and sound signature were critical variables in covert operations. This analysis influenced development of improved suppressed weapons throughout the 1960s. The intelligence community also took notice. CIA training documents from the early 1960s, partially declassified in 2007, referenced Churchill's operations in sections discussing improvised and non-standard weapons for covert action. The documents noted that in environments where firearms acquisition was difficult, historical weapons could provide viable alternatives. There's also an indirect legacy in modern archery hunting regulations. Several U.S. states liberalized bow hunting laws in the 1950s and 1960s, partially influenced by publicity around Churchill's wartime exploits. The argument was that if bows were effective enough for military use, they were certainly adequate for game hunting. Whether this connection was direct or coincidental is debated, but the timing is suggestive.
The most lasting impact, however, may be educational. Churchill's story has been taught at military academies worldwide as a case study in creative tactical thinking. The U.S. Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth included Churchill's operations in its curriculum from 1982 to 2003. British Royal Military Academy Sandhurst continues to reference the operations in lessons on unconventional warfare. The lesson taught isn't use a bow in combat. That would be absurd in the 21st century. The lesson is question assumptions, test alternatives, understand that tactical doctrine exists to solve problems, and when doctrine doesn't solve a specific problem, solutions may come from unexpected sources. One final historical note. In 1985, the British Army opened a military museum at the Royal Citadel in Plymouth. Among the exhibits is a section on special operations in World War II. That section includes a reproduction English longbow, not Churchill's original, which was lost, with a placard explaining the operations described in this documentary. Museum records indicate that the exhibit receives approximately 35,000 visitors annually. Most visitors spend less than 1 minute at the bow exhibit before moving on to more conventional weapons displays. But occasionally, according to museum staff, a visitor stops and reads the full story. And occasionally, that visitor is a younger person interested in military service. And occasionally, that younger person leaves the museum thinking about the nature of military innovation and unconventional thinking. That may be Jack Churchill's most important legacy, not the 42 centuries eliminated over 32 months of operations, but the idea planted in minds across 80 years, that creativity and historical knowledge can solve modern problems.
After the Salerno operation, Churchill continued active service with commando units through autumn 1943. He participated in operations along the Italian coast and in Yugoslavia, though none involved the Longbow. The tactical situations didn't warrant it. On December 15, 1943, Churchill was part of a raid on German positions at Gravina, Italy. The operation went badly. German forces had intelligence about the raid and prepared an ambush. Churchill's unit was surrounded. The firefight lasted 3 hours. Churchill fought with Sten gun and grenades, conventional weapons for conventional combat. But when ammunition ran low, he did something characteristically unconventional. He began playing Will Ye No Come Back Again on his bagpipes. Yes, bagpipes. Churchill had carried bagpipes along with his bow on operations. His reasoning, they were good for morale. The music apparently confused the Germans enough that several commandos escaped during the distraction. Churchill wasn't among them. He was wounded by shrapnel, leg and shoulder, and captured when German soldiers overran the position. German military records from his capture describe him as the mad British officer with the pipes and sword. He also carried a Scottish broadsword, another of his eccentricities. Churchill was transported to POW camps, First to Sachsenhausen concentration camp, a dangerous place where survival wasn't guaranteed, then later to a castle in Tyrol used for high-value Allied prisoners. He attempted escape multiple times, at least 5 documented attempts between January 1944 and May 1945. None succeeded, though he reportedly got within a few miles of the Swiss border during one attempt in September 1944 before being recaptured. Churchill spent 16 months as a prisoner. He later described it as the most boring period of my life, which, for a man who played bagpipes under fire, was saying something. He was liberated on May 5, 1945, when U.S. forces reached Tyrol.
Jack Churchill returned to Britain in June 1945. He was 38 years old, had spent nearly 6 years at war, and received a medical discharge due to his wounds, though he later claimed the wounds weren't serious and that he'd wanted to continue fighting. There was a problem. The war in Europe was over. The war against Japan continued, but Churchill wasn't initially assigned to Pacific operations. He reportedly said to a fellow officer, "If it wasn't for those damn Americans, we could have kept the war going another 10 years. This quote is often cited as evidence of his eccentricity, but the full context suggests he was joking, though with Churchill, it's sometimes hard to tell. Eventually, Churchill was assigned to operations in Burma against Japanese forces. He arrived in theater in July 1945. He was preparing for operations when nuclear weapons were deployed against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. Churchill never saw combat in the Pacific. His active combat career ended with his capture in Italy. He remained in military service post-war, however. The British Army assigned him to various staff positions, planning, training, doctrine development. He served in Palestine briefly during the 1947 to 1948 period, though not in combat operations. In 1946, Churchill married Rose Clements, whom he'd met before the war. They had 2 children, Malcolm Leslie Churchill, born 1947, and Rodney Churchill, born 1949. Churchill's post-war military career included qualifying as a parachutist at age 42, becoming one of the oldest students at the British Parachute School. He also qualified as a surfing instructor, which he'd taken up as a hobby.
Yes, surfing. In the late 1940s, Churchill became one of the first British military officers to learn surfing, traveling to Australia and South Africa on military assignments and taking surfing lessons. He reportedly brought surfing culture back to Britain, becoming one of the pioneers of British surfing in the 1950s. Churchill retired from active military service in 1959 at age 53 with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. His final posting was as an instructor at the British Army's Land-Air Warfare School. After retirement, Churchill worked for a time as a civilian military instructor. He also pursued hobbies with characteristic enthusiasm: sailing, motorcycling, model engineering, and yes, still surfing into his 60s. Churchill settled in County Surrey, where he lived quietly, by his standards, with his wife and family. Neighbors remembered him as eccentric but friendly, the sort of man who would greet you while carrying a sword or practicing archery in his back garden. Churchill gave occasional interviews about his wartime service in the 1960s and 1970s. He was matter-of-fact about the POW operations, describing them as practical solutions to tactical problems rather than romantic adventures. He emphasized that the POW worked because of specific circumstances, not because it was superior to modern weapons generally. In a 1974 interview with the BBC, Churchill said, People ask me if I'd use a bow again if I went to war today. I tell them, of course not. Suppressed firearms are far better now than in my day. I use the bow because it solved a specific problem in specific conditions. That's not romantic thinking, that's tactical thinking. Jack Churchill's wartime service earned him significant military recognition. Distinguished Service Order awarded 1943 for operations in Italy, Military Cross with Bar awarded 1941 and 1943 for commando operations, mentioned in dispatches 3 times between 1941 and 1944. His unit, Number 3 Commando, received multiple unit citations for operations he participated in. Churchill was specifically named in commendations from Lord Mountbatten and General Bernard Montgomery. However, Churchill was never promoted beyond lieutenant colonel. Some historians suggest his eccentricities limited his advancement. Senior officers respected his combat effectiveness, but questioned his suitability for high command. Churchill himself reportedly didn't care about promotion, saying he preferred field operations to staff work. In his later years, Churchill occasionally attended commando reunions and military commemorations. Veterans who served with him remembered him with respect and affection, sometimes exasperation at his eccentricities, but always respect for his courage and tactical skill. Peter Young, who served alongside Churchill and later became a military historian, wrote in 1975, "Jack was the bravest man I ever knew, and also the maddest." Those two things were connected. He wasn't mad in the sense of irrational, he was mad in the sense of refusing to accept conventional limitations. In war, that made him extraordinarily effective. In peacetime, it made him difficult to manage. But we needed men like Jack when the stakes were highest. Jack Churchill passed away on March 8, 1996, in County Surrey. The cause was natural causes. He'd lived a long life, despite years of combat and POW camp hardship. His funeral was held March 14, 1996, at St. Mary's Church in Surrey. Military honors were provided by the British Army, a commando color guard and bagpiper, appropriate for a man who'd played pipes under fire. He was survived by his wife Rose, his 2 sons Malcolm and Rodney, and 5 grandchildren. Rose Churchill passed away in 2004. Jack Churchill is buried at a churchyard cemetery in Surrey. His headstone is relatively simple. Name, rank, dates of birth and death. No mention of bows or bagpipes or any of the unconventional elements that made him famous. He reportedly requested the simple headstone, saying he wanted to be remembered as a soldier, not as a curiosity. His personal effects, including medals, photographs, and documents, were donated to the Commando Museum in Scotland. The museum has occasionally displayed them, though there's no permanent exhibit specifically about Churchill. His original longbow, the weapon that eliminated 42 German sentries, was never recovered. It was presumably lost when he was captured in 1943, possibly destroyed or taken as a souvenir by German soldiers. No definitive record exists of what happened to it. In 2013, a British military historian named Timothy Newark wrote a biography of Churchill titled The Fighting Mad, The Story of Jack Churchill. The book brought renewed attention to Churchill's story and sparked some debate about whether his tactics could have wider application in modern special operations. The general military consensus was no. Churchill's bow worked because of unique circumstances that don't exist in modern warfare. But the principle he demonstrated, that creativity and unconventional thinking have tactical value, remains relevant. Despite his remarkable service, Jack Churchill isn't widely known outside military history circles. Several factors explain this. First, commando operations were classified for decades after World War II. Details of Churchill's operations weren't publicly available until the 1970s, by which time public attention had moved on to other conflicts and other heroes. Second, Churchill's methods were so unconventional that they seemed implausible. Journalists who covered his story sometimes emphasized the eccentric elements, the bow, the sword, the bagpipes, in ways that made the stories seem exaggerated or fictional. This undermined serious historical treatment. Third, Churchill himself avoided publicity after the war. He gave occasional interviews, but generally preferred privacy. He never wrote memoirs. The definitive account of his operations comes from military records and other veterans' memoirs, not from Churchill himself. But for those who study military history seriously, Jack Churchill represents something important. Proof that tactical innovation can come from unexpected sources, that ancient methods can solve modern problems if applied intelligently, and that courage, combined with creativity, can achieve results that conventional thinking can't. The British Army's Special Air Service, arguably the world's premier special operations force, still teaches Churchill's operations as part of its training curriculum. The lesson isn't about using bows. The lesson is about thinking creatively under pressure. Every generation of SAS candidates hears the story of the commando who eliminated 42 enemy sentries with a medieval weapon because he understood tactical problems and solutions better than the officers who'd written the manual. That's the real legacy, not the bow itself, but the thinking behind it.
If this story moved you, please hit the like button. Subscribe to this channel for more untold stories from World War II. Stories of ordinary soldiers who did extraordinary things. Stories of innovation under pressure. Stories of the men and women who won the war through courage and creativity. Comment below. Did anyone in your family serve in World War II? Share their story. We honor their service. And if you know a veteran, share this video with them. These stories deserve to be remembered. These men deserve to be honored. Jack Churchill eliminated 42 enemy sentries with a weapon the Army had called obsolete. He did it because he understood that every problem has a solution if you're willing to think differently. That spirit, that creativity, that courage, that refusal to accept limitations, that's what won World War II. That's what we remember. That's what we honor. Thank you for watching.